Hi, good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? So Richard Ross had to go to his car to get some books. So if you'd like a book, he's charging $30 today for the Beyond Salem book. So that's okay. So my name is Christine Jewell. I'm the coordinator for the Ancient Burying Ground in Hartford. So that's open every day to the public. It's right down the street here, so you're more than welcome to peruse the Ancient Burying Ground. Tomorrow I'll be doing tours about this history again, the 17th century witchcraft trials at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. You can go to the Ancient Burying Ground website for more information, theancientburyingground.org. And we're also starting a membership program, and that helps with a lot of the money that it takes for the conservation and preservation of the Ancient Burying Ground. We recently completed 2 surveys, planning a historic landscape survey and another one to restore some of the table stones in there at a price tag of $1 million. So yes, so we are trying to navigate how to fund that, and so hopefully we'll have a plan, and obviously that ancient burying ground has been there since the early 1630s, and we're going to work as hard as we can to keep it going for the future. Richard Ross III is the author of Before Salem Witch Hunting in the Connecticut River Valley, 1647 to 1663. He holds a PhD in European history and is professor emeritus and former college librarian from Trinity College. His research interests include European demonology and witchcraft in England and colonial America. And he also has told me that he has a new book in print right now about body snatchers. So that's going to be an interesting topic. So please welcome Richard Ross. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and I feel like I already know some of you. But what I'd like to talk about today, of course, is primarily the witch hunting experience from about 1647 to 1663. And those are the ones where the accused witches were executed. Not every one of them, but many of them. So let me get started. Oops, the right glasses here. Yeah. So I haven't done this for a while, and I'm going to go through this part really fast because I'm supposed to keep it to a certain amount of time. But because there's a lot of people that are related to witches, accused witches, I should say, I just want to talk a little bit about this. So I'm going to go right into it. This is what we would call, these were heretics, Waldensians. The captives in Waldensians were heretics in the 1200s, 1300s. And these were people the church was after, and the church went after them very hard for many years. And you can see here that, this is from a script, and these say Vaudois of Waldensians, and they're flying on broomsticks. So it's this image. A lot of the things they're going to accuse witches of being are the same kinds of things they accused other people earlier of being. And on the continent, witches are going to be considered heretics, not having committed felonies, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So very quickly, one of the big issues, the church suffered a lot of problems in the middle of the 14th century, particularly the Black Death. There was a loss of a lot of clergy. The good clergy tended to be out there helping the poor and the sick, and monks, etc. Those places were like what you would call hotels and places where people would stay when they traveled. And so when the Black Death, it's caused by a bacteria, and it's carried by rats and fleas, etc. So they had straw roofs, and so the fleas would fall in, people would carry it with them, and people would die. There's 3 different types of disease. There's a pneumonic, a septicemic, which is a blood disease, and then there's the bubonic, which is where the little boo-boos occur. Okay, so then in the middle of the 15th century, I have this up here very quickly because things were really bad for the church. And the theologians just, they couldn't accept it. The kings were after the church, after land. The church treated the people very badly because most of the people that had come into the church were in it for the money. And so there were real problems. And so, of course, as usual, the theologians sat around and they had these councils and they said, oh, what could be the cause? Well, the cause is, obviously, it's the devil. It's in witches. It's a conspiracy against the church. It's not our fault. So one of the things that the church allowed, usually for heretics, and then it was carried over for witches on the continent, was torturing people. And one of the objectives of torture is not only getting a confession, but also getting people to name other people. Because remember, this is a conspiracy of witches. Another thing they said was, and this is what we call satanic witchcraft. Prior to this, actually in the church too, it was considered a heresy to believe in the devil and to believe in witches. But it all turned around in the middle of the 15th century. So one of the things they said people did was, in order to, get into the, to become, one of the devil's minions, was to make a pact with the devil. The other thing they said, this is just a preparation for witches to go to the Sabbath. They're putting potions on them so they can fly there. Then, of course, here's an idea of what the Sabbath was like. The Sabbath was basically the world turned upside down. People danced backwards. What they did was unbaptized babies. They grabbed them and then they put them into a potion so they could fly. These are the things they believed. And then you see the devil in the middle, and people are giving obeisance to the devil, and some of them having intercourse with the devil and with demons, other demons. So how do these ideas spread? Well, the invention of the printing press, of course, in the middle of the 15th century also allows these ideas to spread. Books begin to get written. One of them is called I'll get to it in a second. Oh, here it is. The Malleus Maleficarum, which means the witch's hammer. It was originally written for a very specific part of Germany. Of course, it was in Latin, but it had a papal bull at the beginning of it. So people saw this, that the Pope was somehow supporting these ideas, and so what this did is it was translated into multiple languages all over Europe. And because of the printing press, it was spread all over Europe. And this wasn't the only book, there were others, but this is a book that taught people how to locate witches, fool them into confessing, and then getting them into court and getting to be executed. This book was never published in English until the 20th century. And then, of course, you burn heretics, and that's what they did. The witches were considered heretics. Well, on the continent, in England, though, things were a little bit different. When Henry VIII decided to remove the England out of the Catholic Church, he wanted to also control anything else that he could. And one of the things he wanted to control was the witchcraft accusations. And so what Parliament did was they made witchcraft a felony. Now, because it's a felony, this is very important. On the continent, I told you, witchcraft was a heresy, which meant you could get, you burned, because you burn heretics. And I don't want to go into it, but I can tell you what it was out of the Bible. And also, the type of court system they had on the continent was Roman law, so it was inquisitorial. Basically, you were considered guilty unless you could prove you were innocent. And you didn't really get a regular trial, like an adversarial court trial like you'll get in England. And the other thing that they did, of course, I told you, was torture. So here we are, Henry. Well, because it's a felony, number one, you get a trial. They have to prove that you're a witch somehow, and that's hard to do. You get to defend yourself in court. In front of a jury, which is good. The other thing that you get is you don't get burned, you get hanged, because you get hanged for a felony. The other thing is they can't torture you, because you can't be tortured for a felony, because otherwise you'd be confessing all kinds of crimes, So what it meant was that there was a limit on the number of witches actually that were accused in England and executed. So in some ways, he saved a lot of people in England, because there was like 50,000 people about on the continent, and we think only about 500 all total in England from when they first started going after them to about the 1680s, something like that. So it's a felony, and it's on the books, and it's repealed in 1547. But then it comes back under Queen Elizabeth, and it continues to be a felony. Not that many witches are actually gotten after by under Elizabeth, but it is on the books. And then what happens is James VI of Scotland, comes to the throne, and he broadens the witchcraft law. He wants to include evil spirits, that if someone conjures up evil spirits and people die as a result, that they could be convicted and sentenced to death. And there are some deaths under James too. And the other thing he does is he's written a book in Scotland called The Demonology. Now, he had a lot of problems with witches in Scotland, and he was, as I said, James VI of Scotland, and he took the throne, didn't take it. He came to the throne when Elizabeth died. And of course, some of the plays that were written, especially Macbeth, was written under the court, under James I when he was the, and with the weird sisters, they say, or the witches, but a lot of times, I think in the play it's the weird sisters. And it's kind of funny because I was reading it the other day, and I was looking for something. I said, oh, look at these two names. I never heard of them before. I never had noticed them before. One was Paddock and Grey Milken, I think is the other one. And the witches mentioned these two names, and it dawned on me. And I said, then I looked it up, and I said, oh, they're familiars. Everybody know what a familiar is? Right, an evil spirit that the witch has and suckles, and I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, if I'm going too fast, please tell me to slow down. Can everybody hear me? Okay, everybody understanding? Okay, because they gave me a limit, and I have so much to say. I hate to tell. So anyway, sometimes I wonder if I should do this because then nobody wants to buy the book, and not here, but in other places. But that's not the book. The book has got a lot of material in it. So what happens? All right, Charles I, comes to the throne in 1625. He doesn't like all this business about witches. He's got his troubles with Parliament directly, mostly economic. And so he says, well, we've got to put a stop to this. So he tells the Archbishop of England, Archbishop of Canterbury, to figure out a way to tone it down. They come up with a scheme. No more books about witches are going to be published. No more books. So in 1627, this gentleman, he was a minister, and his name is Richard Bernard, and he has written this book, A Guide to Grand Jurymen. It's the last book that talks about witches, and in particular, it talks about witches as having those witches' marks and witches' teats. And so this gets written, and then this fellow who's written books for the magistrate, so to speak, has written a book, and he wrote it, and he had a little bit of information on witches in the book, right? But then he starts taking a lot of material from Bernard's book, and because there's a loophole that if you publish a second edition or a third edition, you can put as much material in the book as you want about witches. You just can't write a new book about witches. So this becomes sort of the Bible of the magistrates that are involved in this. So things are somewhat calm as far as witches go. There's a couple of cases. I discussed them in the 1630s. Of course, that's when we're being settled. New England's being settled too. But then in 1642, the English Civil War breaks out. Now, the English Civil War is followed very closely by people here in New England because they're Congregationalists. And the English Civil War is a war between the monarchists in England and the parliamentarians, so they called them Roundheads, and so, or Puritans. And this was a battle this went on for a number of years. The problem was that when the war broke out, each side decided that they were being helped by witches. And so you had broadsides, et cetera, and all kinds of insults back and forth about how witches were helping in battles, et cetera. And so this is a little broadside from a 1642 publication about witches helping out I think it's helping out the monarchists. Well, the government is sort of it doesn't have as much authority as it had earlier, of course, because there's a war going on, a civil war. So Matthew Hopkins, who's the son of a clergyman in East Anglia, England, decides that he's going to go and make his bones by going around and finding witches. So he gets a fellow named John Stearns and a midwife who's a woman, of course, was going to be able to examine for witches' marks on women, because men didn't do that. I have to keep telling people that because of that famous picture, the 19th century picture, that I think I have it. Anyway, so Matthew Hopkins is able to go around, and because of the competition that's going on between the Protestants and, the Puritans and the Church of England and the monarchists, people are at each other's throats. And by the way, I forgot to say, one of the reasons for the spread of witches and witchcraft accusations on the continent, I forgot to mention this, was the Reformation, where the people were at each other's throats too on the continent. So Matthew Hopkins comes up with some ideas on how he can discover witches. One of them is watching witches, and they tied them in a very uncomfortable position, and then they were to sit there and wait for the imps or the familiars to come and feed on the witches, because they would feed on the witches' teats. That's how they got their nourishment. And this is from a broadside that he actually wrote in 1647. It wasn't in color, though. It got colored somewhere along the line. One of the things was swimming witches. You throw the witches in the water all tied up in a very uncomfortable position, and if they sunk, they were innocent. And if they came to the top, bobbed to the top, they were guilty because the water was ejecting them. And it's tied to the idea of baptism. Searching for witches' marks, there we go. There's the one with the men there, and that wouldn't have been the case. So that's another thing. You search for witches' marks. And so some of Hopkins' techniques were, I said, swimming the witch, depriving a suspected witch of sleep, which we would sort of say is torture today, inserting needles looking for devil's marks. Now, devil's marks were different from witches' marks. They were areas of where they were insensitive to pain. So if they stuck a needle in that area and the witch didn't move or didn't feel it, or the person didn't feel it, they would then say that they accused them of being a witch. You walked a person to exhaustion, and then the objective of all this was to secure a confession. Now, we know these techniques were used here because we know they were used in 1648 against Margaret Jones in a trial described by John Winthrop. The familiar in this particular case was a little boy. So now I want to turn back a little bit to how it came over here to Connecticut. So Winthrop's fleet in the summer of 1630 to 31 was part of the Great Migration. Most of the people that came in this ship, they settled in Boston, and they came from East Anglia in England. But for our purposes, there was another ship that came, was supposed to be part of the ship, but part of the fleet, did not arrive with them, came separately. This particular fleet, this particular ship, the John and Mary, had a lot of very famous Connecticut people on it, and like Roger Ludlow, someone you might have heard of him. And they were pretty wealthy people. They were yeomen. They were all put together by a minister named White over near Dorchester, and they came from the western part of the country. They didn't come from the other eastern part, the East Anglian area. So they were. I can't say this definitively, but they were kind of more Church of England types. They were not rabid Puritans, okay? The other thing is different about them, they brought cattle with them, so they were farmers. And they also they spoke in a Western sort of dialect, which was slower than the clipped accents of the people, like you can still hear it in Boston today. If you're in Boston, you ever hear people in Boston talk? You know, okay. I'm from Boston, so I don't know. So they arrive. They live in Dorchester, Massachusetts. They come actually from the area of Dorchester in England. They all come, and they're all related and family, and they all live together. They lived near each other over in England. They came over to Dorchester, Massachusetts, that area there. They all lived together again, but as more people came in, there wasn't enough room for the cattle. So they decided they were going to move. And they finally got a chance to move in 1635, and they moved to Windsor, Connecticut. When they arrived in Windsor, of course, there was another group of people here called the Lords and Gentlemen, and they were actually just carpenters who had been sent here to build a plantation. It's all right. They were sent here to build a plantation for a lot of wealthy men and women to come over and live there. And then there was a small group of people from Plymouth Plantation that were fur traders. So they're living together, and there's some tension, we can well imagine. And then all of a sudden, there's the breakout of the Pequot War in 1636 to 37. This did two things, of course. It sent the people from Plymouth back to Plymouth Plantation to defend their area, but also it opened up the western part of Connecticut and southern part of Connecticut to settlement. So that's really important. That'll be important for later on, but much later than what I'm talking about. So, so there we are. We've got now two groups, and they're sort of at each other's throats, believe it or not. They just don't get along. And then in 1640, John and Alice Young, I have an S on there because the people that I originally got my information from, the local historians here in Connecticut, used the S, but people have subsequently stopped using the S. One of the things that you have to understand about this early histories is that sometimes name spellings they change over time. But I've got the S on here, so I just put it in parentheses. But anyway, this couple moved to Windsor in about 1640. Now, I believe that she had healing skills and that she was using her healing skills. Now, when I say healing skills, I don't necessarily mean witchcraft or anything like that. It was what we would call folk medicine. And sometimes what they would do, and they would discover, the idea was to help people with certain potions that they had, help with animals, if somebody was sick. That was what they primarily did. They weren't necessarily thought of by the common person as being, witches or in league with the devil. So there's a problem. There were also, the other thing they could do, they and others, a person called a white witch, and it was very important, is they could unwitch you. They knew how to take a witch's curse off of you, and that was very important in those days. So we have here the black witch with the familiar, and there's a white witch standing next to him. So the problem was there was a clerical view of white witches and cunning people, and their view was basically that these people were in league with the devil. That's how the clerical people believed it, because they believed that what you were doing was that you were being helped by the devil, and by doing that you were becoming inveigled into his world. I'm going to say it's a his, I assume it is, but so that was a real problem, and we know that this could happen because we have a document from a deposition where William Morse of Newbury, Massachusetts, says though his wife was accounted a witch, he did wonder that she should be both a healing and a destroying witch. So what would happen sometimes is that people would be very good at helping people over a number of years, and then something would happen, and they would start blaming that person for whatever sickness or illness happened, So it wasn't always the healthiest thing to be a cunning person. Thousands of cunning persons in England. This was not unusual because there just weren't people around like we have today. Like the doctors really couldn't heal. Anybody know who Thomas Hobbes is? Anybody ever hear Thomas Hobbes? Well, Thomas Hobbes said he wrote the Leviathan. It's a very important work, and people think, oh, he's very pretty much a realist, I guess is the best way of saying it. What is it? Life is cruel and nasty, brutish and short. That was his famous words from him. But he did say that he thought that if he ever got sick, that he would rather go see a wise woman who's tended to a lot of people than one doctor who's never seen or touched anybody. So that just gives you some idea of how people thought. So what happens? Okay, so then one of the ministers in Windsor in 1640, he preaches to his congregation, "The devil is amongst thee now." And the reason I'm saying this is because obviously somebody was, I think anyway, she might have been doing something and helping people, and the minister didn't like that. He thought she was acting like he would see her as a witch, as worse than a witch, because it was the way that they brought people in to work with the devil. 1640s in Windsor. Years of sickness, untimely deaths. Minister Hewitt, one of the other ministers. You have two ministers, of course, in congregational churches at that time, a preacher and a teacher. He died in 1644. Some of his children died. Windsor was attacked by Indians. Indians are the minions of the devil. That's how they felt. That's what they believed. They did not mix with Indians. The church was racked by dissension. Dissension in the church only means one thing, that the devil is involved. And then there was an influenza outbreak in 1647, and there followed 25 deaths that year. So we have had laws drafted now in Connecticut about witchcraft, meaning that you could be punished for witchcraft. They used both their biblical laws and also laws that were passed in England, like the Jacobin one. We all of a sudden see this. One Blank of Windsor arraigned and executed at Hartford for a witch. John Winthrop, 1647. It's in his diary. No name given. We don't know who she is. Then we get this, what's called the Matthew Grant diary. Now, this diary was found sometime in the 19th century or discovered, but it was in code, most of it, was written in a cryptic hand, shorthand actually is all it probably was. And the Connecticut librarian named Trumbull was able to decipher it. But in the book, on one of the pages, you came across this. On May 26, 1647, Alice Young was hanged. In December, John Newbery was hanged. We know he was hanged for buggery. And we have in March 19th, 1650, John Carrington and his wife Joanne were hanged, and we know they were hanged as witches because it's in the particular court record. So these are a couple of cases that we now know this happened, and we also know that it wasn't made public until 1904. So a lot of this information is relatively new information. So we have up here, I've got 257 years later, and on the bottom there, I came across one record that said that finally John Young, formerly of Windsor, of about Stratford, his wife was hanged for a witch at Connecticut. And I found that in the John Winthrop Jr.'s papers. He also had a terrible disease where his skin kept coming off his body, and so it's kind of a question as to exactly what was going on. But if his wife was helping him, no wonder they thought she was a healer. It's a pretty disgusting kind of disease. So 3 other women with a Windsor connection were accused of being witches. Mercy Marshfield of Springfield in 1649, 1650. She didn't really suffer. The woman that accused her ultimately was the one that paid the price. Goody Basset in Stratford in 1651, and Lydia Gilbert of Windsor in 1654, although the incident itself took place in 1651. So I'm going to talk about Goody Basset. So Goody Basset was hanged as a witch in 1651 in Stratford, Connecticut. And this was kind of the memory that they had of Goody, which was this ice cream shop, And I'm told the ice cream is very good. And this just shows, this is how we were able to track down who her husband was. We know that Goody Basset was married to Thomas Basset he was one of those people that I told you about, those carpenters that came to Windsor. And he and Goody moved down to Stratford, after it opened up, the area opened up. And then we have the Governor Haynes, Mr. Kulik, and Mr. Clark are desired to go down to Stratford to keep court upon the trial of Goody Basset for her life. And some of these people are buried over in the cemetery over there, the ancient burying ground. And this is just a kind of a court record of Goody Basset. And then we know there was a record by John Hale, who was he was involved in the Salem witch trials, and he wrote a book in which he says, I've also heard of a girl at New Haven or Stratford that confessed her guilt. This was unusual, but all others denied it unto the death, unless we talk about Rebecca Greensmith later at Hartford. So what I'm trying to say is that we only had little bits and pieces. We didn't know exactly what was going on. And I just want to tell you that on Thursday, they dedicated a memorial to Goody Basset in Stratford. I went down to the dedication, and so they finally took them a long time to get it, but they finally got a nice memorial in their green down there. So the problem was, and I'm telling you this because this was not a witch trial, but it was a slander trial, but it gives you some idea of what must have happened to somebody. So Goody Knapp is named by Goodwife Basset as a witch in Fairfield, Connecticut. A women's committee searches Knapp for witches' marks, and you can see they're all women in there. We have there as the midwife. And Knapp is then tried. Midwife Odell, I told you that the midwife was the one that was the only person, I didn't say this, but it was the only person that they would allow, only woman that they were allowed to go into court and give testimony at that time. The court concludes Knapp had familiars and had made a pact with the devil. And the reason for the pact with the devil, because if they proved that she had the witch's teats, then that meant she had made the pact with the devil. That's how they interpreted it. In England, it wasn't quite as severe as that. But over here, it seemed like the idea got spread that if they had a witch's mark, a witch's teeth, then they were in league with the devil. So Knapp's imprisoned, awaiting her death sentence. She's interrogated. She says, "I'm not going to render evil for evil. I am not going to say that I know another witch here." She's taken to her place of execution. Goody Knapp's hanged. And then what happens, this is very interesting. Mary Staples, a woman who actually this trial was about, the slander trial, her husband, Roger Ludlow, hated Mary Staples. He lived next door to her, and he brought her to court. And the husband called her a witch, and the husband got upset, and I think his name was Thomas, and he sued Ludlow. And this was the slander trial, the Goody Knapp information I'm giving you. And at the end, Mary Staples is said to have defiled Knapp's corpse, and when she was cut down, she said the marks were not but such as she herself or any woman might have. And the lady standing next to her, Lucy Pell, said, "Aye, and be hanged for them and deserve it too." And then midwife Odell came over and told her to be quiet or she'd be next. So that's what happened then. But that's how we know sort of what went on at these, not so much the trial, but after the trial. They were trying to get her to confess. That's what they wanted. Who's the other witch? And then here's the Knapp Memorial in Bridgeport. So the next trial I want to talk about is the trial of Goody Garlic of East Hampton. And she was tried for the death of Elizabeth Howell. And as you see up here, in 1658, Goody Garlic was tried for witchcraft in Hartford. She was accused of actually murdering some people down there in Long Island. It was in Long Island. That's where she lived. And Governor Winthrop, Jr., in East Hampton, Long Island, used his influence in the past to get people out of being executed for witchcraft. And Governor Winthrop had come to the governorship in 1657, and he used his influence because he was skeptical of witchcraft accusations. And Winthrop did not use the English common law, but one of three, and one of three, and it's called the Scots verdict. So you have guilty, not guilty, that's what we have, common law, and you have not proven, reserving judgment of guilt or innocence, which is a third category, and the Scots actually have that. And so by doing that, he allowed her to actually go back to Long Island, and basically they said to her, if you behave yourself, you won't be punished, but if you act up again, we're going to bring you back and try you again, and this time, you'll probably be found guilty. So one of the things that we know was that supposedly poor little Elizabeth Gardner Howell of East Hampton, Long Island, she's the one that they had the trial about. She's the one that she died, and she supposedly was throwing up pins. It's one of the things that people said she was doing. Besides the fact that there were familiars involved, specters, all kinds of accusations, and people actually stayed in the house with her, and they said they saw things too. It was all going on in court. And so they were really upset that she went back, that she got off. And then there was another case in 1661 of Nicholas and Margaret Jennings, who also were accused of witchcraft and of killing people. They also got off. And the people, the true believers, that's what I try to kind of call them, the true believers were really, really upset. And they thought that these two people should have, this couple and the Goody Garlic should have been executed as for witches. So this turns now to this demonic possession and the witch hysteria in Hartford. So one of the things that was going on in Hartford for over 10 years was the elders in the church, the Hartford church, versus Samuel Stone. There was 10 years of infighting going on. And the problem was the elders supposedly run the church. They do run the church in a congregational church. The ministers, as I said, are teachers and preachers. They really they're not supposed to have much say in the church. Well, Samuel Stone thought he was a Presbyterian. That's my joke, by the way. So he thought he was running things. Well, anyway, so they fought it out for almost 10 years, and they couldn't get away. The elders couldn't, it was impossible for them to get out of the church. So basically what happened, in 1659, they finally were able to break free. They got some property up in Hadley, Massachusetts, and they all left to Hadley, Massachusetts. Now, this is Hartford's best families withdrew from Hartford, the elites, many of the elites, and they abandoned by their leaders. This led to land disputes in Hartford, a paralyzed church, as well as dispirited people on the edge of what was then the New England frontier. The other thing was Charles II was restored to the throne. I told you that Charles I was beheaded. Oliver Cromwell became a supreme leader in England, and he was there till 1658, I think. And then, his son was not very, he wasn't very good, and so finally they were able to get Charles II back on the throne. And the problem with Charles II coming back to the throne was he began going after the people that had his father beheaded. And he also, one of the things that also happened was our friend John Winthrop Jr. realized that the people that had settled Connecticut didn't have a royal patent. And so he wanted to get a charter for Connecticut. So Winthrop goes to England to get a charter for the colony. And while he's gone, Hartford's world is turned upside down because they're not sure what he's going to come back with. And so the Hartford witch hunt begins. And it begins with little Elizabeth, Kelly, 8 years old. She comes back from church with Judith Ayres. They're eating hot soup. She's going to eat hot soup, and her parents say, "Don't eat the hot soup." And Judith says, "Oh, no, go ahead, eat the hot soup." The little girl eats the hot soup. She goes to church with Judith, comes back, gets sick that night, gets very, very sick. We know this because we actually have a document. This is a document that tells us what happened. And it was the parents giving their testimony about what their daughter did and said. She said, "Goody Ayres torments her. She pricks me with pins. She will kill me. Father, please set on a great furnace and scald her. Get a broad axe and cut off her head." And her last words were, "Goodwife Ayres chokes me," and then she was speechless, and then she died. So the little girl died. So the problem with Judith Ayres was that when she used to tell stories, and she said when she was in London, she actually met a man she was going to go out with, and she went out with him the second time, and she looked down and saw that on his foot she perceived it was the devil. So clearly it was a cloven hoof. She said she refused to meet with him again, but you don't talk like that in those days. Just the mere fact that you might have talked about meeting the devil was enough to get you involved. So Judith Ayres and another woman who was helping out, Goody Whelpels, had attended the child while she was sick. They were brought in to view her corpse. The father was distraught. He manhandled the body. There was no sign of bleeding. He was looking for bleeding because that's part of what they call the ordeal. The child's body was placed in a coffin. John Kelly, the father, called them back in again, and he said, he said, "Look at the child's face." And then we looked, and we saw upon the right cheek a reddish, tawny, great spot on the side next to Goodwife Ayres, where she stood. So that meant that any body will bleed upon a witch's touch. That's from one of the, that's from a country justice, this book that was used. So we have the fact now that it looks like the little girl was bewitched. And these are from documents. I don't make this stuff up, okay? So they decide, well, it's not enough. Let's have an autopsy. And this is unusual because you never do an autopsy for, it's never usually been done for somebody that was bewitched. So they go to they're at the graveside and they do the autopsy. And a fellow named Rossiter, who's supposed to be a doctor, we're not sure, but anyway, he says that I find a he lists the 6 things, and he says, I judge them to be preternatural when I opened up John Kelly's child at the grave. So that's all I needed to hear. A coven of witches is now suspected in Hartford, and they decide they're going to swim Judith and William Ayers, and they do swim them, and the 2 of them bob like corks, which, as you all know, what that means now. So then a little young lady named Ann Cole, 16 years old, becomes possessed. And she starts rolling around and accusing people of being witches. Well, the ministers, Samuel Stone and Joseph Haynes, Stone and Haynes are buried over there in ancient burying ground. The former governor, John Haynes, and he's the son of John Haynes. John Whiting, another minister, and Samuel Hooker of Farmington, form a council, and they are the only ones that actually are allowed to investigate. Because if you're not a minister, you're in big trouble if you start talking about witches in those days. So the ministers wrote of Anne that she spoke in a Dutch tone. She uttered things which were awful and amazing to the hearers. She was possessed by a company of familiars of the evil one, who she named and were contriving to carry out mischievous designs against others and herself. I know that. Mischievous in those days was a very strong word. It wasn't like we think of it today. And she also had violent bodily motions, even to the hazard of her life. And so Ann Cole accuses Rebecca Greensmith, Elizabeth Sager, and others of witchcraft on a special day of fasting and prayer held in the Willis Manor House in the autumn. Now, one of these things something about this was like an entertainment or a show. Everybody shows up for this to see what's going on, and everybody's excited. So this is a picture of the manor house that supposedly that would have been held in. The manor house was finally broken down between 1827 and 1834. And matter of fact, that's where a lot of the documents were held that we never knew about what happened because they were in private hands. Reverend Whiting and Reverend Haynes recorded what Ann Cole said about Rebecca Greensmith. Her accusations were used in the court. At Rebecca's trial on December 30th, 1662, she confessed to knowing the devil. Rebecca Greensmith confesses to witchcraft and implicates her husband as well. These are the documents. That's her confession there that I have up there. Let's see if I can go back there. Okay. She confessed to knowing the devil, and she implicated her husband. Oh, she said she had sexual relations with the devil. At Christmas, they would have a merry meeting, and then the covenant would be signed. The Reverend Stone stood up in court, highly insulted, and said that why would she sign a pact with the devil on Christmas? Well, Puritans didn't want Christmas celebrated in any way in New England. It was seen as the devil's holiday or holy day. As it was outlawed in Massachusetts, as some of you may know, and even in England. And Samuel Stone was trying to get it outlawed here, but he never succeeded. Greensmith confessed to attending a witch's Sabbath. Now, I just want to tell you, these things that I'm telling you now, these probably seeped in later. But remember when I started at the beginning, I talked about what they thought on the continent about witches signing pacts and going to Sabbaths and all that stuff. So it's probably the ministers that are feeding her this. I'm guessing this because I don't think she knew all this stuff or would have confessed to it. In the woods we danced, and they had a bottle of sack, and something like a cat called out to me. Rebecca then named other witches in Hartford, and Judith Violet, one woman, said she was troubled by Marshall Gilbert, and if it lay in her power, she would do him a mischief or what she could hurt. So that was not a good thing for her to say. She accused her husband, Nathaniel Greensmith. She said he had preternatural strength and had a black dog and foxes, etc., as familiars. And she did this because for her love of her husband, that she accused him of being a witch, to save his soul. Rebecca and Nathaniel are convicted and sentenced to death. Hanging the witch was both a crowd entertainment and a moral lesson. All three were hanged. Mary was hanged last. Mary Barnes was she was from Farmington. We don't know very much about her at all, but we know that she was hanged with the 2 of them. She was tried with another woman called Elizabeth Sager. Elizabeth Sager got off because people said, oh, they saw her dancing around a cauldron with an Indian, or they saw her flying, and they said, this is very unusual. They said, well, did you have your glasses on? No. Well, then how could you see her? And this came out in a document that was that the foreman of the jury actually had to write something, I think, so people would know why they didn't convict her of being a witch, and he explained it to the people, and we have that document. I don't have it here, but we do have it. I thought that was very interesting. So now the end of the executions, but not suspicions of witchcraft, occur with the trials of Catherine Harrison of Wethersfield. She's accused of being a witch, tried in 1669. She's convicted in 1670. Our good friend John Winthrop Jr. says, well, I really would like to have a little more evidence before we have her executed. So he went to Gershom Buckley and some other ministers and said, will you tell me what is it, what do we need to have as true evidence here? And they said, well, we need to have 2 people witness the occult act. And so that put an end to that. And she was so hated in Wethersfield that even though she was let go, they told her that they banished her, and she went to New York because she was hated. Catherine Harrison, just a very quick thing, she also came from London, and she was supposed to have, what she did was she supposedly told fortunes, and that started all kinds of problems for her. She was supposed to have known or have what we call William or Walter Lilly's book, which was a book on astrology. And so some people thought she had more than his book, but that's. So those are the ministers. That's the document with the ministers. And we have the list of the executed witches. And as I said, we have an Alice Young, Mary Johnson, I didn't speak about, in Wethersfield, John and Joanne Carrington of Wethersfield, Goodwife Basset, Goodwife Knapp, Lydia Bliss Gilbert of Windsor, Mary Sanford of Hartford, Nathaniel and Rebecca Greensmith of Hartford, and Mary Barnes of Farmington. And of course, I talk about all these people in my book. And the last thing I just want to say is, this is an epitaph that Longfellow wrote. And I thought it was kind of good for the end because of what's been happening with the exoneration and everything. It says, those who lie buried in the potter's fields will rise again as surely as ourselves, that sleep in honored graves with epitaphs. And this poor man, he was accused of witchcraft, was Giles Corey, who was pressed to death, whom we have made a victim, hereafter will someday be counted as a martyr. And I say that in the sense that today people look with more respect on these people. And that's, I thought Longfellow had it pretty good then. Okay? Thank you very much. I actually have an end. There we go. Any questions?
All right. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you so that the people watching online can hear too.
Oh, there's people watching online?
Okay, well, hello, people online.
I didn't know that.
So you mentioned Nathaniel, that he reported his wife to be a witch?
Nathaniel Greensmith?
Yes.
No, his wife said he was a witch.
Oh, okay, sorry, I misunderstood, because I was saying that, well, he was hung, and so,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah,
So.
she said that was one of the problems, that if you either knew a witch or, got involved with a witch, it kind of, the taint came on you too. You had to be very careful in those days,
Anybody else have any more questions?
Why is witchcraft considered a crime, a felony? Were they killing people? Were they killing?
Yes, well, the thing is, if you see, witchcraft, one of the things that was a serious aspect of witchcraft was you could bewitch someone to death. And so, like I told you about the witches that were accused, people said they bewitched them to death.
But then there were really evidence that they were killed by the witches.
The evidence is very difficult. That's what people said, but then they had to prove that they were a witch, and that's why we were looking for witches' teats and other things. That they would say that definitely this person was a witch and could use those powers.
Anybody else?
Gallows Hill was not a place where they hanged the witches in those days. The reason for that is because it was supposed to be a crowd entertainment. So some people think they were hanged here, and others on Asylum Avenue. And so the Gallows Hill that they talk about is actually, they hanged revolutionary traders there. Because in those days, in the time of the witches, right, in the 1650s, 1660s, etc., it was just a slag area, it was woods, you couldn't even get to it. That road that was put in, I forget the name of it, runs along the side that goes up where Gallows Hill is, that wasn't put in until the 19th century, pretty much, or late 18th, early 19th. And people didn't want to go to a place like that to watch a hanging. I told you it was like an entertainment, you know. So anything that more people could come to and see was important.
Any other questions?
Could you go back to your slide with all the deaths?
Sure.
Any
Now,
other
this
questions?
isn't to say, by the way, that all the oh, thank you very much. This isn't to say that all witchcraft accusations stopped after 1663 or 1669. People still believed in witches, and as you probably know, in the latter part, just before 1692, there were a number of witch cases in Fairfield, Connecticut. And one of the women was she was actually condemned to death, and she only got off on a technicality, and she was very fortunate for that. And because, you know, the same thing was going on, as you know, in 1692 in Salem. And people still believed in witches. It wasn't just like all of a sudden, it was regular people that believed in what witches did. There's two types of crimes. One was the crime that was against God, and the other one was harming people. And the average person believed that the witch that they knew was like making the butter sour, or causing a sickness of some sort. You know, that kind of stuff? That was like maleficia. That's what the other kind of crime that they were concerned about would be what the ministers were more concerned about, and that was signing a pact with the devil, turning your face against God, that type of stuff. You know, and that was, for them, that was the reason that somebody deserved death, actually. Is it Mercy? Was it Mercy Disborough?
It's either Disborough or the other one.
Yeah. Begins with a C, I think.
There's
Yeah.
so many people involved.
Yeah, it's a real. What happened, what I remember now, you may have to go back to verify this, but I believe there was a jury. And when, in between the time that they convened and then they decided to vote for the death penalty, somebody was substituted on the jury. And they found out about it, and they said, well, you know, this wasn't the same jury that heard the trial that actually did said that she was guilty. And so when they found that out, they sort of, were able to do away with it, said that it was a mistrial, and she was able to go free. But she was very, very fortunate in that regard. They didn't really want to do it. I mean, the magistrates at that time in the 1690s here in Connecticut did not want to have this person executed for witchcraft, you know. Any more questions? No?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Great audience. Thanks a
Yes,
lot.
thank you. I'm with the Ancient Burying Ground Association, and I'd like to thank the Old State House for partnering with us. The Ancient Burying Ground is open. It's just a few blocks down on the right, so please visit sometime. And Richard Russ always also has some books for sale over there in the corner if you'd like to have a book and get it signed. Thank you.